Will there be significant federal policy changes? President Trump was clearly moved by what he heard at the White House and, listen here, promised to take the lead.
We're going to do strong background checks. We're going to work on getting the age up to 21 instead of 18. We're getting rid of the bump stocks, and we're going to be focusing very strongly on mental health.
But, and it's an important but, the National Rifle Association quickly made clear it opposes raising the age limit to buy a firearm. And the president appears to be backing off some. He did not mention the age limit on Friday when discussing gun policy on 3 separate occasions, instead emphasizing a plan to allow teachers to carry concealed firearms. And then this last night on Fox.
I think we're going to have a great bill put forward very soon, having to do with background checks, and perhaps we'll do something having, on age, because
right.
It doesn't seem to make sense that you have to wait till you're 21 years old to get a pistol, but to get a gun like this maniac used in the school, you get that at 18.
So he came back to the age proposal last night in the interview with Judge Janine after dropping it on Friday after the NRA said that's not something we're open to doing. The question is, and the president also tweeted after for days emphasizing let's arm teachers, tweeted on Saturday that should be up to the states. So what will we get from I want Congress to do this from the president? And if he's waffling at all, doesn't that, like Obamacare repeal and replace, like immigration, DACA, and Dreamers, mean that you're never going to get something through the conservative House in an election year unless the president says this, and sticks with it?
The one specific proposal that President Trump has supported, raising the rifle age from 18 to 21, has been opposed by the #2 Republican in the Senate, John Cornyn, not exactly a foe of President Trump. That tells you a lot, that there's enough energy in Congress among Republicans to resist this sort of thing. President Trump, it should be noted, has talked a lot about background checks. He's not endorsed any specific proposal. Is he talking about the Fix NICS bill that Cornyn and Democrats and even the NRA support? Is just about compliance with existing law, encouraging people to report more into the system? Is it about closing the private sale loophole where a person can buy a gun off Craigslist or the internet without a background check? The president has not said. So without a specific proposal, we don't really know what he's talking about. We do know that there's no appetite, no indication among Republican leaders who run Congress to do anything about this issue, and nothing is going to happen without dedicated, focused, consistent push by the president. He doesn't seem to be doing that.
To that point, let's bring the House Speaker into this. Largely silent last week, but listen to the House Speaker back home in Wisconsin saying, let's not talk about taking away the rights of law-abiding citizens who back the Second Amendment when, in this case, and this is a fact, there were so many missed signals.
This young man slipped through a whole bunch of cracks, not just a crack. He slipped through a bunch of cracks. We got to make sure that when law enforcement gets all these tips, that doesn't happen again. We got to make sure that people who are mentally unstable, and we just passed a recent law on this, don't have the ability to go do this.
We'll talk in a minute about the collapse of accountability in Florida, but in terms of the federal debate, anybody who says that is telling the truth. Whatever your position on gun control, AR-15s, magazine clips, that's a fact. That there were a lot of, they did fall through the cracks. A lot of warning signs were missed, and it gives those who don't want to change federal gun laws in a big way a pretty powerful argument.
Well, there already are a number of reasons why someone can't own a gun. Domestic violence, you can't own a gun if you're a felon, if you've been adjudicated as mentally ill. But oftentimes when these threats are presented, they don't reach that level. And that's why I think the most serious idea that's been presented so far is this idea of a gun violence restraining order, where people who are family members, close friends, can go to the police and say this person is a threat to either themselves or to others, and take the guns away. I think that is narrowly targeted. I mean, you don't simply want a mentally unstable person, a dangerous person like the Florida shooter, to not have semi-automatic rifles. You don't want them to have any weapons. So I think that is the most serious way that, again, we can lower the threshold but still protect due process rights.
And that is one piece that we understand, that we have been reporting that the White House is interested in and looking at. I do think it's going to take a few days for this to gel a little bit better, to get a better sense of what's happening between the governors coming to talk to the president and what we're expecting to be like a midweek bipartisan gathering at the White House. He's got to figure out realistically what can pass, realistically what it's going to cost him politically and with his base to pursue any of this. I still think really that the test is not what will Congress do right now, but how has the public changed its thinking, and is this going to be a ballot box issue?
And will it be a ballot box issue? Will the state of Florida be the laboratory, a key swing state? We'll get to that in a minute. And also, what about the public standing of the NRA? It is very interesting. You heard the president at CPAC saying, I stand with the NRA, I'm talking to the NRA. But we have seen just over the past several days, all these companies cutting ties with the NRA, reducing their discounts that they offer to NRA members, not issuing credit cards in the NRA's name. And if you look at all the companies, Delta, United, Enterprise Car Rental, Avis, Budget, Simple Safe, North American Moving Services, Alamo. You just look at the list of companies right here. These companies, they don't do this nilly-willy. They have decided for their brand, a relationship with the NRA is not in their broader interest. Are we at some turning point here, or is this temporary?
There does.
Well, I mean, the groundswell of sort of youth-led activism on this certainly does seem to have changed the tone of this entire debate. I mean, you didn't see any corporations or many corporations doing this in the past, in the wake of past school shootings or gun massacres of any kind. So the debate certainly has shifted. I think the reputation of the NRA may have shifted in a way that we haven't seen in the wake of past shootings. The question is, though, does this actually affect what is the source of the NRA's clout, which is not direct donations, but the groundswell of public support all around the country that it has and can mobilize in elections. And I do think that that is the key question that Republican governors and other governors are looking at as they figure out what changes to the law they're willing to accept, and certainly the president is going to be looking at as well, because while all last week he did seem to say, you know, I'm with the NRA loves me and I love them, but I'm willing to buck them, we haven't actually seen evidence that that's actually going to happen.
Look at a map of House districts around America if you want to understand this. How it plays in Washington, how it plays on the coast versus how it plays in America, House district by House district. It's very instructive as we go forward in this debate. Up next, the Broward County Sheriff lashed out at the NRA after the Parkland school shooting. Now, he faces questions about whether his... If you were watching the CNN Town Hall Wednesday night, you remember the Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel lashing out at the NRA and making a strong push for new gun laws.
18-year-olds should never have a rifle. An 18-year-old kid should not have a rifle. 18-year-old kid, they're not adults yet. They're in high school. These kids should not have a rifle. Bump stocks should be illegal. They should be outlawed forever. Automatic rifles should be outlawed forever. And anybody who says different, I don't know about other people, but Emma and I, we're calling BS on that.
But Israel's department is now front and center in a giant accountability crisis. Law enforcement received numerous warnings about the Parkland shooter. And as the massacre played out, at least one Broward Sheriff's deputy, perhaps as many as 4, stood outside the school but did not enter or try to confront the gunman.
You're despicable. You know, you didn't do your job. You were trained for this. You were armed. You had a bulletproof vest. You were protected more than anybody else who died, who lost their lives. And you did nothing.
It makes me pretty angry, I gotta say. I'm pretty upset about that, because as a police officer, you've made a vow, you've made an oath to protect the people that you are policing, and they didn't do that for us.
So there is, and I always think it's a good thing to have conversations, if you can have them respectfully, in the country and in Florida about should we have new gun laws. But there is also a giant question of what happened here. How could you have, some people say 39, some people say the number of calls is fewer than that, but dozens of calls and warnings about the shooter. The fact, and let's focus on the sheriff for a second, that one of a deputy assigned to the school who was armed stood outside while you could hear gunshots inside, and then there's an investigation about whether when did 3 other deputies who did not go inside arrive. Did they arrive after the shooting stopped and stay outside? But these are giant questions for the sheriff, who I should note is on State of the Union with Jake Tapper after this program. It's a big part of this.
Oh, huge, and it's tragic. I mean, we heard the president talk about it this past week. The sheriff's deputy, the first one that we discovered after he resigned earlier this week, had basically been hiding outside essentially while the shooting unfolded. There's obviously going to be a huge investigation here, and it's going to have implications for this department as well as probably, I would think, police departments all over the country. But I think it seems pretty clear from my understanding that what the procedure was supposed to be is if you are the resource officer assigned to a school, you go in a situation like this. You don't wait for cover. You don't wait for a word. This is your job. And I do think that we're going to be hearing a lot more about this in the context of this gun debate, because there will be people who will seize on this and say, it's not about guns. It's not about anything that allowed this shooter to get to the school with a semi-automatic weapon. It's about failures in the police department, and you can't argue there were obviously clear failures.
You can't. The passion of the students is what is driving the gun control debate, and the state of Florida and the country should have that conversation. But the actions of the adults are pretty good factual fodder for those who say before we change any existing gun laws, we should enforce the ones we have. We should follow the process we have. I just want to bring, this is Mark Meadows, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, influential conservative House Republican, tweeting, the Broward County Sheriff in front of a nationwide audience on CNN lectured the NRA and millions of law-abiding gun owners when all along it was his department that did nothing. After 39 calls, multiple threats, and failed to fully engage the shooter. Astounding. We need answers. Again, the 39 is in dispute. The fact that there were many calls is not in dispute. And for the political conversation, that's a pretty powerful argument.
Well, they're not saying 23, but if a single one of those calls provided information that could have been used to arrest him, to take his guns away, the sheriff has to resign. I mean, if he sat on that information that the deputy did not go in at that town hall so he could whip up sort of to cover. I mean, we have to remember the sheriff, like most sheriffs, is an elected politician. He's not just a law enforcement officer with a badge and a uniform. So I think there's already a lot of calls for him to resign and a lot of reasons for him to potentially do that.
This has been a failure of law enforcement locally on a variety of different levels. There's no two.
And the FBI also didn't follow its own protocols.
And it sounds like there's going to be hell to pay about that in Florida one way or another. I think when you zoom out and look at mass shootings overall, there are some shootings that are, end up being a failure of law enforcement. If the laws on the books, if they were enforced properly, would have stopped it. But let's remember the Las Vegas shooter, the deadliest in mass history, passed his background checks to obtain more than 40 guns. And that's why I think you're seeing a shift in the debate. A lot of progressives are looking at this and saying, well, it's not just semi-automatic assault rifles. If you ban those, then handguns kill more people. Simply raising the age of rifles is not going to do the trick. What progressives really want is dramatically fewer guns on the streets of the United States. And now we're beginning to hear activists actually say that, and rather than pay lip service to the Second Amendment, as a lot of Democrats have done for a very long time.
And so will it happen? Will it happen? What will happen at the federal level? Again, we had that conversation. And let's look at Florida, a key swing state. You have a big governor's race this year. You have a Republican governor who's been an ally of the NRA, who's now likely to run for Senate in a race that could determine control of the United States Senate. Republican Rick Scott against Democratic incumbent Bill Nelson. And the governor did put forward a proposal that breaks with the NRA. Governor Scott says, let's raise the minimum purchase age for a firearm to 21. Ban bump stocks in Florida. Toughen background checks. Strengthen mental health laws. Increase funds for school security. So a pretty comprehensive package here. I know there are some people already questioning whether the governor means it, or is this a political document for his Senate race. Yeah. But here is, in one of the country's, again, highly competitive, critical swing states, a great laboratory for this conversation going forward.
Yeah, it is an important barometer of some kind because it shows one of two things. It shows that he thinks that he can move ahead in the election process without the NRA's support, or that the NRA recognizes the change in the climate and is willing to give him a little bit of slack, particularly if he's proposing something that doesn't happen right away. You can feel better about one answer than the other in terms of the purity of politics, but either way, it does represent, I think, a significant shift in the potential climate.
And that's what happens when the gun control side puts the heat on the way they have. And that's what happens when students and teenagers are speaking out so forcefully the way they are. Marco Rubio, who is an ally of the NRA, consistently voted with them, a strong gun rights supporter, softening on this. He said he supports raising the age from 18 to 21. He also said he would reconsider his vote in 2013 when he voted against banning high-capacity ammunition magazines. He said he may end up supporting that down the road. Rick Scott, also an ally of gun rights and the NRA, softening on this. This is a meaningful shift, and it shows what happens when there's comparable passion and energy on the gun control side as there has been on the gun rights side. The gun rights side and the NRA and groups like them, some of them even further to the right than the NRA, are very good at hanging tight in the middle. And when the mass shootings happen, being patient, taking the heat in the moment and then resuming their activities. The left is good at exactly the opposite, keeping the heat on right after a mass shooting and then getting complacent after it.
Right, and will 2018 prove the difference? Will this young student survivor activism, actually to the point you made earlier, change the results at the polls come November? Will we actually see it play out at the polls, that the message that if the gun control advocates are going to win, that's where they need to win?
Well, we've seen some movement among Florida Republicans, but you also need to see a lot of move among Democrats if you're ever going to get any gun laws through Congress. I mean, there's something like 10 Democrats in the Senate still opposed to the assault weapons ban in 2013. You've seen people like Marco Rubio, as Sahil pointed out, saying that they're willing to reconsider some elements of it, such as limiting the capacity of magazines, which could reduce the death toll, wouldn't stop these killings necessarily from taking place, but could lower the death toll.
Let's have some votes, get people on the record. How about that? What a strange thought in a democracy. Next, a border wall, the national anthem, and chants of lock her up. CPAC welcomes the president. It once viewed with a lot of caution. And yes, Republicans say the darndest things, politicians say the darndest things, even about their hair.
I'd love to that guy speak. Oh, boy. Let's see. I try like hell to hide that bald spot, folks. I work hard at it. Doesn't look bad. Hey, we're hanging a little bald. Got this beautiful speech. Everything's wonderful, but a little boring.
That was Friday at the annual Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, and the pro-Trump crowd didn't mind one bit.
We have a very crooked media. We had a crooked candidate too, by the way. But we have a very crooked media.
What did we learn here from CPAC? And I'm old enough to remember when you'd go to CPAC and people would talk fondly about their time with Barry Goldwater. Yes, I'm that old. Or in the Reagan years. And they talked about, CPAC was conservatives got together to beat up on the communists and talk about the dangers of the national debt. That was not what happened the last few days.
No, the insurgent energy and the idea of a backlash against a government or leaders that they feel threatened by has been the thing that has driven CPAC for a long time. If you went any time, and I went a number of years under the Obama administration, it was very active, it was very energetic, a carnival-like atmosphere, as one person who was there described it to me, was not there this time. They run everything, they're happy and they're content, and the politics of backlash and fear are often stronger than the politics of hope and optimism and contentment. I think the biggest takeaway from CPAC, I would say, is the extent to which President Trump and the rise of this figure has moved the conservative movement in the direction of kind of European-style populism and nationalism. We see that with the focus on cultural nativism and issues like that, trade protectionism, anti-immigration sentiments. You had some speakers who were talking about the naturalization ceremonies in glowing terms got booed. The crowd booed a panelist who said Mexican immigrants actually have a lot in common with conservatives. We see a palpable shift in this movement.
And to your point, stars of the show, if you will, the Republican majority leader from the Senate, not there. The Republican House Speaker, not there. They're the evil establishment to this crowd. But two international voices who are part of the nationalists.
I want America first for the American people. I want Britain first for the British people. And I want France first for the French people.
But it all makes you realise, doesn't it, that in 2016, with the Brexit vote and the election of Donald Trump, we stuffed the establishment. We did.
Now, in the UK and in France, they are called nationalists, to be kind. Critics call them anti-Muslim. Some call them xenophobic. Some call them racist. They're welcome at CPAC.
Yeah, I mean, if you saw those speeches, there's obviously this effort to give it more of a nationalist populist feel. But if you listen to Donald Trump's speech, when he rattled off his greatest hits, these could have been said by any Republican president, tax cuts, a conservative judge. So in one sense, Donald Trump has moved the party in this nationalist populist direction. In another sense, the Republican Party has moved him to being just much more of a typical conservative. I mean, the question is whether this long-term damage done to the party by putting someone up on stage who, the president himself was considered a fringe figure at CPAC when he first spoke. I mean, he is a well-known conspiracy theorist accused of sexual assault by multiple women. Does that degradation of the party ultimately outweigh the good the conservatives believe is happening?
What strikes me is somehow that I guess everybody needs an enemy, but I want you to listen to Wayne LaPierre here. He runs the National Rifle Association. We have a Republican president, Republican House, Republican Senate, 35 Republican governors. Most of the state legislatures run by Republicans, and in Wayne LaPierre views, the country is under attack by the socialists.
Everyone keeps their mouth closed and their heads down, and that's exactly how socialistic societies function. When leaders do whatever they want, when resistance and repercussion disappears, and when the fundamental concept of moral behavior is expunged, the state rules the day. And anyone who attempts to resist is smeared right into submission. We do live in the socialistic age of the art of the smear.
Do we live in a socialistic age with all these Republicans in charge of everything?
Yeah, I mean, the president is a Republican. The House and the Senate are controlled by Republicans. Most state houses are controlled by Republicans. But this shows two things. One is that in the last 13 months, a lot of the norms have been turned inside out, and this is kind of a fault line or a proving ground for that. And two, it helps explain why it's so difficult to get bipartisan compromise if you're a Republican and there's this base that's pulling you in this direction.
Parallel universe, some of it. We'll ask our great reporters to share a little something from their notebooks, get you out ahead of the political news just around the corner. Julie?
Well, it was easy this week to overlook these big new sanctions that President Trump and the administration imposed on North Korea. They've been talking about sanctions for a long time. These were significant sanctions against the shipping industry that would essentially target ships importing oil and exporting coal from North Korea, which is a big issue in terms of funding the regime and their nuclear operation. Of course, they're not sanctions directly on the nuclear operation. But the question now is, how far will the Trump administration go in enforcing these? Are they going to be boarding ships, which is a military operation essentially? And there have been a lot of conflicting messages coming from the administration, I'm told in part because there's still a divide between folks at the State Department that really want to pursue a diplomatic channel and folks at the National Security Council who really are looking more toward a